Hi, and welcome to Talking Wildfire. Today we're here with Murry Taylor, who's a really special person. And Murray had smoke jumped for a really long time, and he also wrote a really unique book about smoke jumping. And Murray, can you tell us a bit about your career while you got in the fire and whatever you'd like to tell the audience?
Hey, okay, Mike, and thanks a lot. And first off, thank you for making the effort to get this story out. I appreciate all the work you do in the work of fire there, buddy. Anyway, for my little story, I was raised west of Fresno out on a 40-acre farm. And as a little kid, I remember I used to stand and stare at the Sierras. And I just looked at them, a blue, haze. There they were, profiled over in the distance. I had a longing for the mountains. And when my mom and dad went camping there, I remembered that I always counted the days. Oh God, we're only going to be here today and tomorrow, and then we have to go home. And I love the mountains so much. And then when I was about 14, we were driving out of the Sierras on a way home on a rainy afternoon, and we passed a little cabin with a chimney and some smoke coming out of the roof. And I saw that house and I thought, that lucky guy, he lives in the mountains. And that's when it occurred to me, well, you could live in the mountains too. And from that time on, Mike, I wanted to go to the mountains. So once I was out of high school, I I went to work on this year on the North Fork District there up at Clearwater on a timber stand improvement crew. And then, of course, we went to fires. And for me, I love being in the mountains. I love waking in the morning. I love hearing the cookhouse ring the triangle and stomping into the cookhouse with the workers and living in a tent frame. But going on fires was the most exciting part, being there, feeling the urgency of it, the retardant planes coming over, the people talking on the radio, the sense that we were doing something really important and a high level of cooperation. Really, I just loved it. I remember one instance in particular on the Minarets District. After 3 years on the North Fork District, I went up to the Minarets, which is right next to the John Muir Wilderness in the backcountry there on the Sierra. One morning, I was involved with a fire down in the North Fork of the San Joaquin, and I hopped in a helicopter right early, Hiller 12E, with a pilot in the middle, and I was sitting on the edge, and the doors were open, right? And here we are flying back into the high country toward Mount Banner and Ritter and all that high country in the back country of the Sierras, and the sun broke over the horizon. And I looked down at the country out that door and looked around myself and said, just look at what you're seeing now. Just look at what you're a part of. So that was kind of the beginning. And then later, a couple years later, I was working in timber because I was a forestry student. And then I always would go to fires and get in some kind of job. Yeah, I heard on the radio that jumpers were jumping and was up toward Jackass Meadows. I pulled over, and up in that clear blue Sierra sky, here they came, the orange and white canopies out. And it was the jumpers out of Redding, out of a Doug. And I said to myself, man, going to fires is fun, but that's got to be the most fun way of all. So that was 63. I applied in 64, didn't get picked up, but I did get picked up in 65. And then immediately loved it. I rookied there in Redding in 65, and I was a forester. I went to work here on the Klamath in 66, and at that time they allowed jumpers to retread. You could come on your district after you'd had a full season down there, and then you could go in for 1 week. You could get your gear, go on the units, make a couple practice jumps, and come back to the district, and you would be available when they had needed extra jumpers. And so that was great. That allowed me to stay in jumping and still go ahead with my career as a forester, a young forester. And so that was all fine and dandy. And then I transferred down to the San Bernardino so I could get more fire experience, because I even was telling them then my interest in this whole thing is in fire. more than anything else, and which was rare for a so-called professional college graduate. So I went down there and I went on a lot of, and I worked on the engines with Kirby Moore, and I worked on Hill Attack with Jim Hess, and I went on big fires with old Bull Evans, Howard Evans. You know, he took me along as a line scout. So I was getting a lot of experience. And then all of a sudden, the ranger tells me, you got to forget this fire stuff. You're going to be a district assistant ranger here in a couple of years, and you need to quit this fire stuff and get on with your career. And I told him, I said, well, we've had a deal here that I wanted to go up the line of fire. You know, I wanted to get into fire. I wanted to be the base foreman up there in Reading at one point. And then after that, I was simply going to be happy being a district FMO with a pretty good fire load, so you could train new people every year, and just be right in it and be in the best of fire. I loved the camaraderie. The fire community had more esprit de corps and more fun, I think, than the rest of the Forest Service, is kind of how I saw it. And also, I was born and raised on a ranch, and a lot of the values of the working fire people matched the way I had been brought up out there on the farm in San Joaquin Valley. But anyway, when he told me that, we had a big run in, and then he said, okay, well, one more year. So I went back and trained in Reading, and then went home. And then I was walking down the hall one day down there in Idlewild on the San Jacinto district, and I heard the door was partly open in Howard Evans' office, and I said, well, I hope he just doesn't find out. So I opened the door, and there they were, Howard and the ranger, and they were like fox caught in the hen house. It became clear that actually Reading had called for me to go back and jump. And Vern Stevens was down there also at that time, a Reading jumper. Vern had gone, and they didn't tell me. They didn't even tell me. You know, it was one thing that we had a deal that it would be one more year, but for them to have the call come and then turn it down and not even tell me was too much, Mike. It was too much. I began to think about, I don't know, I had some other trouble down there, and I thought, okay, that's it. I'm going to go back smoke jumping. Billy Bowles and Don Weeder and Bobby Carr had gone up to Anchorage and jumped up there out of Reading. I thought, I'm going to get a hold of those guys. Maybe I can get on. I told the Forest Service, I'm going to resign. I was a GS9. I'm going to resign. I'm going to go up to Alaska. I'll get smoke jumping out of my system and then come back to my career. But I went to Alaska, and I wasn't there 6 months, or 6 weeks. 6 weeks. And I said to myself, this is it. I'm never going back. This is where I belong. And that was it. And I never did go back. And it was the best decision I think I made in my whole life. I really do. That. And then, I jumped to 6. That was timely because those were the T-hanger years. 73 was, well, we didn't move to the T-hanger till 74. And I think that was 74 through 78. But anyway, that's my book, more or less crazy, is about the T-hanger days. And so I fell in love with Alaska. You asked me yesterday what I thought was special about Alaska. And here's the way it's kind of settled out in my mind. I think, first of all, it was the state itself, the land. Alaska was huge. And at that time, the span of control of the overhead was such that you couldn't dictate what went on out on the Seward or down south of McGrath. And so what they had to do, because the commo wasn't that great, the distance were too long, the logistics were tough. And so for the people that worked up there getting all formed up in AFS, a lot of authority was left to the people in the field. The jumpers even carried an SF-51 that they could actually hire a boat or even an airplane or a night in a meal in a hotel. And so this freewheeling attitude that was up there, the fact that you could find yourself demobbing a fire and all of a sudden end up in Granite Mountain as station area manager as they were working a bunch of fires out on the Seward, was really exciting and empowering, not just the jumpers, but the AFS people too. All of a sudden, people who got very little authority down here and very little opportunity to exercise it were in positions up there to run fairly big operations. And it turned them on, and they got so excited about it, and they loved the job. And that's what I think, that's one of the things that made Alaska really neat. The other thing, too, was there's a type of fire that we fought in Alaska that people didn't fight down here. Down here, the jumpers mostly jump a 2-man or a 4-manner. And, it's a burning snag, and it was an all-night job and maybe a day and then a hike out. But in Alaska, we had some of those wind-driven tundra fires that we would drop 2 or 3 Volpar loads, which would be 16 to 24 guys. And it was an extended effort. We would split and take off and go up the left flank, right flank, and go all night. And the way things were up there, when the wind quit, the humidity came up, the temperature went down. Many occasions we were able to make huge pushes on these extended attack fires and actually wrap up a fire at 400, 500, 1,000, 10,000 acres. I mean, there were times that the other managers would fly out in the morning expecting to have a big order for more crews and order, supplies and native crews and everything, but they would just see a huge black spot and they couldn't believe it. But that's because we stayed out there and we believed we could do it, by God, and we did do it. And I can tell you, it made fighting fire in Alaska really fun. When we rounded those heads so many times late at night and 4 o'clock in the morning and beat that last bit of line out with a burlap bag or a spruce bough, and the high fives and the jumping around and and all this kind of stuff was really, really a lot of fun. And I think that defined the part of the joy of being a jumper up there. And then, of course, there was the management. There wasn't a lot of management then, just like I wrote in More or Less Crazy. When I got to Alaska in 73, the Alaska Smokejumpers were on the chopping block. They had been thrown in jail too many times. They got in too many bar fights downtown. They had done various ridiculous things. I mean, good God, on the Swanson River fire in 1969, 2 jumpers went to Hawaii for a month and put in time slips and got paid for being on the Swanson River fire. And eventually they were caught. But that shows, that shows what outlaws they were. And so they were going to get rid of them. And that winter, Larry Cravens died in his trailer house in a fire. Larry burned up. He was a foreman up there. And so the overhead said, okay, they're going to put young Al Dutton. He was a squad leader then. We're just going to put you in charge for this season because we're getting rid of your crew next year, but you can take it and run it. They left him as a GS7. And I think that was about 74. And at the same time, Mike, we got moved out to Fort Wainwright off of the Chena River, where the old BLM place was those really cool tent frames and the nice buildings, and right on the river with birch trees and lawn and everything. We got moved to Fort Wainwright with chain link fences and asphalt and the Army into an old abandoned World War II hangar, the T hangar, with no plumbing and no electricity and no heat. And and we had about half a dozen or a dozen guys straight home from Vietnam. I mean, guys that Jim Veach and John Rakowski, Brian Fitzsimons, some of those guys were just back within a month from Vietnam, and now here they were on a Army post. This is what Al Dutton inherited as a young manager. Not only that, by that time, the word was out. Alaska was kind of fun to be in. In the lower 48, a lot of the management that was run on the jump bases came straight out of World War II. It was the GI, they were Army guys. When they got to be jumpers, they ran the show like, do it because I told you to do it. And it was that kind of top-down authority up there. But in BLM, it wasn't that way, you know. That had a lot to do with the way BLM organized a lot in 1965, I think, after the Organic Act. And so up there in Alaska, all these guys came back from Nam, and the guys, the bad boys down here, the guys that couldn't get along with the strict discipline kind of a thing that was at some of the bases, the militaristic, you know, everybody wearing a white T-shirt and black camp buttons and short hair, and all that was down here. Those guys that didn't get along down here, they came to Alaska. So Al not only had a bunch of Vietnam veterans, now he had some of the Dirty Dozen guys from the lower 48. And actually, Al loved that because he was kind of a Dirty Dozen guy himself. Al had his own. Boy, Al Dutton's a real story. I said if there's such a thing as a hero in that more or less crazy book, it was Al Dutton, and I meant that. Al was an extraordinary leader, and I've often talked to Rod Dow and different about it, and mentioned that we weren't sure whether Rod or Al Dutton was a great leader by design or by default, but when he took over that old tea hanger, boy, I mean, he had a problem on his hands. They were going to get rid of us. There was no cafeteria out there. They hadn't set that up with the Army, and it was cold, and we used to bellyache at Al and everything and complain. And in the meetings, he would just slump down deeper and deeper in his chair, and his Marlboro ash would get longer and longer. And the thing about Al, though, he wouldn't say, you know, shut up and quit complaining. He would go, yeah, I know you're right. You know, you're right. This is bad. I'm trying to do something about it. I don't know what we can do. And by allowing us to talk like that, and finally, I think the way he didn't push us off, he listened to us. And actually, in time, his approach, by not denying our claims, helped us see that actually this is our problem as much as Al's. That's the way I see it, really. And we started to get an affection for Al. For one thing, he would stick up for you no matter what. If people got in trouble with the Army, they got in trouble with the cops downtown, Al was always right there to bail out the bros, 100%. He would stick to the bros. If something bad would happen to the Army and Jack Firestone flipped off the base manager, and then the base commander was mad, and Al would just let that sit for a couple of weeks and then go have dinner with the guy. Al was an expert of diffusing stuff like that. But then the other thing that he really did, he said, you know, they were getting rid of us. They were going to use helicopters to do all the IA up there. They had 10 of them, 205s. Bobby Carr was in charge, actually. Al decided, let's get the Volpar. We'll get this Volpar. It's a fast airplane, and we'll get a 6-minute getaway time, and we'll start showing them that we can get off the ground and get to these fires as fast as they can. And this is the short version of all the stuff that went on. There were a lot of other really important, powerful people there at the time. Mike Clarkson, Larry Vanderlyn, and Jim Veach, you know. And anyway, by God, you know, pretty soon that whole thing began to click, and we had a 6-minute getaway time, and now we were beginning to be an outfit that was really trying to do better. And sure enough, we started going out and meeting the helicopters and picking up the fires. And I think that postponed their decision to get rid of them long enough. And before long, you know, Al was our base foreman there, but eventually, you know, he came to run AFS up there, and then eventually he was the head of the BLM Fire and Aviation nationwide. So anyway, that's kind of the way I loved Alaska, and I think It was the management mostly that came from Al, and here's what Al believed in. If you didn't always run and control people all the time, if you let them have their say and let them do their way, they'll probably put out more for you in the long run than if you try to micromanage them too much. I mean, and that old T-Hangle, because of his management style, so many people flourished to the front and took up Paracargo. You know, we got Paracargo back, and then we got the loft back, because before it was contracted out. Al's understanding, it was kind of like, who was the great Raider football coach? John Madden. I guess John Madden was kind of the same kind of thing. When he had those great winning teams, they were wild people. You know, they were wild. And I think Al saw that in wildness, if you can let it go, it produced more things. And, you know, Mike, subsequently, the Alaska Smokejumpers, the way they became by the time I left, you know, down in lower 48, a rookie didn't even get to go into the loft for the first year, and a rookie didn't get to think about rigging for 2 or 3 years. Alaska went the other way. Our rookies started rigging right away. We taught rookies to do everything. We got rookies involved as quickly as possible. When rookies would be first people, we had a policy up there, first man in the door took the fires, and we stuck with that. We had a lot of experience. But if it was a rookie and it was a four-manner and it was out on the Seward somewhere, the spotter would say, how do you feel about this fire? And if the rookie felt okay about it, he'd say, okay, well, you got some good guys behind you here. Just talk with them. We wanted rookies to jump fires, take fires as quick as they could, as many as they could. And that was different than the lower 48, because that, I think it excited people. It let them demonstrate. It showed that people had trust in them. And they came home after catching some really good fires as rooks and had good stories to tell. That esprit de corps that we had, even in 73, when I came down south to La Grande as a booster, Lee Walton was running that place up there, and it was really strict. Oh, my God. When we landed on the tarmac at 6 in the morning after flying all night and unloaded off the DC-3 flying in from Seattle, we were getting off the airplane, and over the intercom comes this voice, all jumpers arriving in La Grande, please report to the north side of the building and stay between the two yellow lines. You know, he said this, and we all broke out laughing. We thought, and Rakowski goes, hey, these guys have a sense of humor. You know, so they went all directions, north side, south side, away from the, attention, please, stay between, you know, all this kind of stuff. Anyway, we got there. The only people who were there were Lee Walton and my good buddy Davis Perkins and George Steele. That's when I first met him. And here, by the way, let me show you a picture of my buddy Davis. You can see this. This is Davis. Can you see it? This is Davis Perkins checking me out at the old standby shack up in Alaska. Anyway, after that happened, Mike, that was 73. La Grande had 10 guys. And that season, 9 of them left and came to Alaska. We stole the entire La Grande crew because it was fun, you know. Yeah, well, we had a lot of fun. That turned out to be a huge season there at La Grande. I mean, we had McCall, we had NCSB, we had Redding, yeah. I forget, we had Missoula. We were busy. And so anyway, that's kind of, you know, then of course I got out of jumping for 8 years. You know, my son wanted to come and live with me after my wife and I divorced. And so I came home here. I got draft horses and had them for 8 years. And then after a time, I couldn't make any money, I couldn't make any money with the draft horses. My good friend Everett Houston, who was a McCall jumper and an Alaska jumper, and special forces guys in Nam, and my doctor, well, he's my nurse practitioner. He said, "Why don't you go back jumping?" I said, "Well, man, I'm old now. I'm 46." And he goes, "Well, they can't discriminate against you by age now, and you're in good shape. What have you got to lose?" I called over there to Boise because that time they were down in Boise, Clarkson was the main guy. Steve Nemore was in charge. And right away I talked to Mike, and Mike and I were great friends in Alaska, but at the end we kind of had some run-ins, and that combined with Mike coming home, anyway, I kind of left on testy terms with them up there in Alaska. For one of the things that Mike was a great guy, liked him so much. When we were on fires together, when he was the main guy and I was the line boss, we were just perfect on fires, and I really liked him as a person. But he had a hard time being a manager in a way. He was wild as hell when he was young, but one of the things he came up with, we had 62 people on the crew. He wanted to rate everybody from 1 to 62 on the crew. And I thought, you can't do that. There's no way in hell. How you? And Rod Dow put it perfectly in a crew meeting. He said, "Hey, take your first 16 off the list, and I'll take 16 guys randomly off the list, and let's go out and fight fire and see who puts the most fire out." So anyway, based on that, I left. And then when I talked to Mike on the phone, he said, "Well, you and I," it was 8 years later, he goes, "Well, you and I used to have a lot of arguments about the way to run a crew and all this and that." I said, "Yeah, I know, but I need a job." And he said, "Well, I just want you to know things have pretty much gone my way." And I said, "Mike, I'm glad for you, but I do need a job." And so he said, "Okay, talk to Nemore." So I talked to Steve Nemore, and Steve said, "Let me call around." He talked to some people. A week later, he called me back. He said, "People say you're in really good shape," because I was horse logging, man. I had my horses, man. I was in primo shape. But he said, "We're going to give you a try, but don't come over here and embarrass us and not pass the PT test." So the beautiful story about that was when I got there, they had assigned Mark Klinger to be my special trainer because they thought I couldn't do it. But that first morning down on the Green Mile down there by the river, in the Boise River, I ran shoulder to shoulder with George Steele, who had been hammered the season before, broke his leg, broke his wrist, knocked some teeth out, fractured his jaw over in Nevada on a bad jump. My good friend, my great buddy, and no better smoke jumper ever, George Steele, and I ran side by side on that, and we ran the 3 mile in 22 minutes, side by side. And Mike Clarkson was there at the end of that, and he walked over to me and he said, "That was pretty impressive." He said, "I told myself if you came here and passed this PT test the first time," he said, "I was going to go to work and get you back your old GS6 Step 10, which he did. So that was pretty neat. I was back in. My first jump, Craig Irvine, Pigpen, spotted me out at Star and finally said, "What's this feel like to you?" And I said, "Mike, Craig, it's just like riding a bicycle." So then I jumped as a Boise jumper in 87, and then I went to Alaska for the other 12 years. And because of that, jumping fire became a reality, and some interesting things happened. That's pretty much my career. I will say this. A lot of because of the freewheeling management thing that went on up there and the tone that Dutton set with the people, I do believe it made it so that Alaska became such an innovative, the dispatch people in Alaska, everybody was pretty happy working up there when I was up there between, 88 and 2000. And dispatch, they developed a dispatch system that was adopted widely nationwide. The jumpers came up with the ram air parachute, a lot of safety equipment, and innovative. And then most recently, as you may or may not know, this whole big drone fire program is by Gary Baumgartner and Dave Whitmer out of the Alaska Smokejumpers. They sold that whole program to Cal Fire here, and those guys have classes now, and our old buddies are out teaching about drones. So I think that goes with my whole idea about don't ride your people too hard. Let them come forward and express. It might be harder to manage them. It probably will be. But in the long run, I think you'll produce a better product. I feel that's a given in my book. And a lot of that, Al Dutton was a big part of setting the stage for that up there. But I'll say this in conclusion too, Mike, like I owe so much to the Smokejumper community. I thank them for being the kind of people they are, that were drawn to the experience. Maybe they, for fire, for the love of adventure, maybe they were adrenaline junkies. Whatever they were, I thank them for creating a community of people where someone like me could come in and actually become involved in some efforts working fire, and actually come to see that at times I could actually be brave and be strong beyond doubt. And I don't think everybody gets to know that in life. And I did. And I did it because of the jumpers. That was the only community within which I could do that. You were there. I mean, when you were over the Salmon River and it sucked and the wind was bad and the smoke was going one way and another and the fire looked skunky and all over the hill, and you knew you were going to jump, you were going to jump. You were going to jump because Jeff Bass is going to jump, and because Jim Kitchen's going to jump, and George Steele. And you went with them. And we did amazing things because we went together, and we always went. And I jumped for 27 seasons and never turned the jump down once. Yeah, okay. This is a story I call the pants story, and it's one I like to tell because it highlights some things I have a lot of strong belief in over my time, and of the Alaska Smokejumpers in this case. Sometimes when I'm out at a service station here in the valley, I see an engine crew parked there getting gas, and I look at the young firefighters, and they got their Nomax pants on and their t-shirts and their white boots and all that stuff. And a couple times I've actually walked over to them and said, "Hi, hey, I see you got these Nomax pants on. Do you know the story behind these pants?" And of course, they don't have any idea about it. But anyway, how the current fire pant became was like this. I think it was about 1998 up in Alaska. By that time, everybody was wearing the old pants, the old fire pant. We called them pickle pants. And that came, I think, from the Redding Jumpers called Charlie Caldwell's first hotshot crew, the Pickles. But anyway, in Alaska, they were terrible. Everybody up there, FSS, the hotshots, everybody wore them. Even though everybody hated them because, I don't know if you ever wore them much, but they were short in the crotch. They were thin in the summertime. I don't think they had two categories of fabric. But in Alaska, when they got wet, the wind just went right through them, and berry vines punctured through them, and they clung to your knees. So when you had to step over the tussocks, it was quite a bind on your legs, and it would be abrasion on the top of your thighs and so on and so forth. And the mosquitoes could drill right through them. And yeah, they were just terrible. And the Alaska Smokejumpers had refused to wear them. We're not wearing them. They're terrible. They're miserable. Everybody knows that. We're not wearing them. Well, anyway, one day in 98, I believe it was, the safety officer from Fairbanks, from out of the Fairbanks office, which was for the whole Fairbanks Alaska Fire Service unit up there, came down to the jump shack. He was an ex-jumper, Don Wall, and he said, "Okay, call the crew meeting. This is the way it is. From now on, you guys are going to have to start next week. You're going to start wearing the regular. You can get them at the warehouse. You got to wear these Nomax pants." So there was a lot of mumbling and grumbling on the crew, and some guy says, well, we don't like those. They're no good for this reason and that reason. And he said, we don't care. We've heard enough from you. It's time for you guys to do like everybody else. You're going to wear this pant, and that's it. Or we're going to take you off the jump list. So, man, there was some shuffling of feet and this and that. And one guy piped up a GS6. By that time, he was a GS6 Step 10 because he'd been around a long time. And he said, well, I'm not going to wear them. And it was John Dubay. And everybody looked at John. And so then they went over to the list and said, okay, then they took John Dubay's name off the jump list and stuck it down in the bottom right-hand corner. And so, man, I don't remember. We shuffled around there. We talked a little bit about it, and the guy left. And he's, so, geez, we were all stirred up and everything. And Rod Dow and I got together with some other people. We started talking about it. Look at this. This is bad. They're going to take John off the jump list. They talk about safety all the time. He's bringing up an issue that he thinks is a safety issue. And they're taking the bro off the list. So we started talking among each other, and we decided if they're going to pull John off the list for that, then let's go off the list. Let's all go off the list. And by God, that just caught immediately. They call a roll call again, where everybody came in there. And Dow even met with the rookies who they were only a week out of rookie training. And Dow said, look, I understand if you don't want to go off the list. You worked hard to be a rookie. And it would be completely understandable if you didn't want to back up on this. And by God, all 6 or 8 of those rookies said, no, we're in with you. We're going to go out and sit on the lawn with the whole crew. So actually, out of the 64 guys or whatever, only 2 did. And I'm not going to mention their names because I really like them a lot. One's a really, really great friend. So the rest of the crew went out. We went out. There were a few guys out of field stations, I suppose. I don't know if the whole crew was there. But the bottom line was, word got up to the head shed that, hey, you don't have a Smokejumper crew anymore. So they came down again. 2 of them, Don and another guy, and wanted to know this and wanted to know that. And I think Roger Voris Dalen Romero was a foreman then. And Dalen kind of stayed out of it. And they came down and talked to us, well, what are you doing? And we said, well, we don't like it, what you've done to John. He's a good guy, and he's making a safety thing, and now you're putting him off the list. So anyway, they said, okay, well, we have to work something out. And so they went back to the head shed and came back in a couple hours with these spray bottles, Mike. They had these spray bottles with this fireproofing liquid in it, that you were supposed to spray. And at that time, almost all the Alaska guys wore those Army BDUs that had the cargo pockets, they had the adjustment strap on the side, they had the tie strings at the bottom. They were very deep in the crotch, and they did have a summer twill and a thicker winter twill. And that was the Army. We bought them down at Rocket Surplus, and I'd sent away back east somewhere and got a pair of fire pants because I could see kind of, and the guy, it cost $110 then, and I was showing them around to people, but it didn't have the cargo pockets and stuff. But anyway, they came down and said, well, you can squirt your BDU pants with this for the time being, and we'll try to figure something out. Tony Pastor was R&D then, and right away, Tony got together and had a hold of MSO, and they started talking about it, and it was, I don't know what happened, if it was that year or the next year, but the next year, the official fire pant was that one they have now that's based on the same cargo pant, deep crotch, and they have 3 different sizes for different sized people and everything. And I think that's pretty true. Rod Dow says that he he agrees that that's where it happened. And even Paul Nathan, who used to be an Alaska jumper, I think Paul had gone to Boise by then, and he ended up running the whole warehouse in Boise. He told Rod that, in fact, yeah, that's the deal, the fire pan. The word here is that the fire pan came from the Alaska smoke jumpers. And so I like to tell that story because there's a story of cohesiveness, of solidarity, of honoring the brotherhood, really, in a way, and standing up and pushing back. And I think at one fire meeting, I went a little further than at other fire meetings, and we were talking here with the forest supervisor on the Klamath about this and that and one other thing. And she kept saying how everything came from the top now, that Washington, the region, down to the forest. Washington region, they didn't have a lot of choice for this or for that. And so I said, well, what about pushback? What about pushback? And so I told her the fire story. Told her the story of the fire pants. And I said, why was it, with all the leadership in the Forest Service, at all the levels, why did the fire pant change have to come from a GS6 in Alaska? They didn't have an answer for that. And so I told him, sometime maybe what you need to do is wear the pants. That brought a stir to the crowd, and after the meeting broke up, a couple guys from Cal Fire came by and said, man, am I glad you said that. They said. So, anyway, that's my fire pants story, and it was, it reminded me of a lot of the good things that was there in that Alaska bunch.
Murry, thanks a lot for your time today and talking with us about the Alaska program. I know from my own experiences in Alaska, it's a really unique place to be a smoke jumper, also because of the environment. Can you tell us a little bit about just what it's actually like to be there physically on the ground?
Yeah, Mike, I'm glad to, and I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things that made that experience so special, there were times when we flew for 2.5 hours way out west and dropped way out on the Seward or out on the coast, the west coast there, and you landed on the ground and you took off your helmet, and there was an enormous quiet. The immensity of the aloneness of that big, big country. Down here, you might have been in the wilderness, but 30 or 40 miles over there was a road and a town. But up there was a great, great emptiness to a lot of that beautiful country. And some of it was miserable out in the interior in the swampy parts, but some of it was just glorious in the foothills of the Brooks and Shelby Lake and the gates of the Arctic and McNeil River with all the bears. And so it had that element, for sure, that great emptiness. And back in those days, we'd be dropped on a fire. We wouldn't hear from anybody for 2 days. They even lost jumpers then. I mean, and the guys damn near starved to death. I put that one story in more or less crazy. But anyway, yeah. And then, of course, that story, that one story of the best bear story had to do with Lynn Flock and Rich Halligan. They jumped this far down south by McGrath somewhere. And they'd worked the thing. I think it was 10 acres, and they were tired, and they went to bed about 2:30 or whatever. They were in bed, and this is the way I wrote it up in the book. And I asked Halligan, and he's approved it pretty much correct. I don't know. Lynn woke up. Lynn and Rich made a cargo shoot hooch together. And Lynn tells it like this. I woke up and I felt something down by my feet, and I looked up and I saw that some was pushing in on the cargo chute. Some was pushing in, and then I saw claws come through the fabric of the cargo chute. The claws came through, ripped a hole, and then bear's hair stuck right in the hole was a black bear's head immediately. And Lynn jerked his feet back and started swiggling in his, and then Halligan woke up. And Halligan claims that Lynn screamed, and Lynn claims that Halligan screamed. They probably both screamed. About that time, the bear came around the side of the cargo chute hooch and hit Lynn on the head and kind of knocked Lynn over, and then went next door. And Brian Fitzsimons had a cargo chute hooch with a cargo strap tied between two spruce trees, holding up his hooch. And this bear apparently stood up on its hind legs and jumped on that hooch that it got high strung on that cargo chute off the ground, and was hanging there, flopping back and forth on top of Fitzsimons. And Fitzsimons was yelling, "Hey, you guys, quit it, guys. Leave me alone, goddamn it, quit messing around." And Len goes, "Fitz, it's a bear, it's a bear." And then Fitz started screaming. The bros started getting up. They started chainsaw. George Steele was there. They lit some fusees. The hot slag hit on their feet. They were hopping around in camp, and they started a fire in camp and lit their camp on fire. And so all of a sudden they were fighting fire in camp, and they looked up and the bear just ambled off across the hill by itself. So anyway, there was that story, and then the other one. Have you got time for a fish story?
Yeah, Mike? Sure. Go for it. Yeah.
We were demobbing down by Lake
Yeah, go for it, Murray.
Yeah, we were demobbing down by Lake Iliamna. And we were there at the lodge waiting for a pickup, and the guy that picked up an airplane ride home. And the guy that owned the lodge, he said, "Hey, you guys, take those two vans," and he said, "You have to go down to the head of the Nehalem River and look at the way the fish are coming in there." He said, "You got to go watch it." So we jumped in there and we went down there, and Mike, honest to God, we walked down to that river, and there was a coil on the close side of the river to where we were that was probably 8 to 10 feet in diameter, solid black. The fish were bumping together on this huge cable. They were just, man, the bros went wild. John Wallach started throwing rocks at him, cut his spear, cutting willow spears. And the bros were trying to catch a fish, and they were going nuts. And two guys, Rob Collins had a pole, and Scott Bates. Anyway, they were hooking up and trying to catch fish, and so I didn't want to fish. So I walked up the river looking, and I saw a guy fishing up there. And he was catching one right after another. And so he said, "Hey, I got a lot of fish. You want to fish?" I said, "Oh, sure." This thing was about 2.5 feet long, beautiful salmon. So I took the thing back down, and the bros had bought a burlap bag down to the river to put their fish in, but they didn't have any fish. So I put the salmon they didn't even see me. I put the salmon in the burlap bag, and I went up on the hill to sit and watch the lake and all that. And I went up there, and I rolled a joint, and I was smoking a joint up there, watching the whole thing. And around the headlands come this super cub, like this with floats, yellow, and went around the corner. And pretty soon, up walking through the tall grass comes this guy with these big waders on and a big yellow slicker. And I said, "Hey, man, you got here just in time. This is great. Look out, there's a lot of good fish to catch here and everything." He opened up his jacket and he had a badge. He was a state trooper. Yeah, he showed us he was a game guy. Boy, shut up. And then, so he walked on down and he caught him flat-footed. And they claimed that they weren't really trying that hard to catch fish and this and that to the guy. Anyway, he said, "Well, we don't have any fish." And so he went over to the burlap bag and he pulled that salmon out that I put in it. So they were kind of caught, and he wrote them up. He didn't write up Rob Collins because they had licenses, but he wrote up Jim Veach for fishing with Rob's gear. And he wrote up John Wallach for fishing with Scott Bates. So this story's almost over. So they got wrote up, and the time came back at the base 2-3 weeks later. John Wallach got the letter from the magistrate. You have to appoint at a certain time your game violation, fishing without a license. he wrote a letter to the magistrate, brought it to my room, and he goes, Murray, read this and see if you think this is okay, because I got to go home. I can't stand being away from Francie and the kids anymore. I got to leave. He was a real hyper guy anyway, totally white hair and piercing blue eyes. And he said, I said, John, you can't do that. You can't do that. You got to go in and see it. He says, no, I can't do it. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to send it in. I said, all right. So he sent the letter in to the magistrate and went home to Wisconsin. A couple weeks later, Jim Veach goes in. He gets a letter. He goes into the magistrate, and he's talking to the magistrate. And in this letter that Wallach wrote, he wrote, I don't know what happened to me. I always like to jump fires and protect the moose and protect the squirrels and protect the animals. And I just saw those fish, and I temporarily think I got crazy, and I'm sorry I did it, and I wouldn't do it anymore. I built a house down by Hope, Alaska. I have a family and this and that. So when Veach goes before the magistrate, the magistrate's got this letter out, and he goes, so you're a smoke jumper, and you like to jump fires and protect the fish and you got crazy down there on the river, and you have a house and Hope and everything. And Veach is looking at him, and Veach goes, yeah, that's right, that's me. So Veach pretended like he was John Wallach, and the judge let Veach off on the strength of Wallach's letter. And somehow Veach got off, and Wallach never heard from him. So both of those guys got off on the strength of Wallach's letter. Anyway, that's my fish story.
Well, Murray, you're a master storyteller, and we really appreciate your time and coming on with us. I know you published a number of books, and we'll put those in the description links to this video so people around the world can look at them and access your books, see how to get them. And Murray, thanks a lot for your time. We really appreciate it.
Mike, thank you so much for taking the interest in it and gathering these stories from the old timers, and I really appreciate it.
We're doing this for all of you. If you like what we're doing, please give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and leave a comment below. See you next time.